you all? Good. I'll come back there because I can't hear.
Seconds. Good afternoon. Is it on yet?
Testing 1, 2.
Hi, good afternoon. Good evening, should I say. I'm Donald Easton Brooks. I am part of the University and the College of Education and part of the Center of Cultural Responsive Practice and Oregon Teacher Pathways. Just here, I want to welcome you tonight and say that we really appreciate your support for the program and really appreciate all the energy and effort you put into the program. I have an opportunity to engage with different stakeholders across the state, dealing with cultural responsive practice, dealing with equity, and helping the state to kind of move forward in that way, and to really think about how we're preparing our teachers and how we're preparing our students as we move forward. In the United States, we're seeing a big shift in our demographics. We're starting to see that we have more students of color, more people of color that are moving across the states. And the Western states are seeing it more than any other state, any other part of the country. And of that, Oregon is seeing the change more than any other state in the West. And so as we think about Oregon and its shift demographically, we have to think about really how are we shifting the way we respond to our students, the way we respond to our communities, and the way we respond to each other in that same way. The work we're doing in Eastern Oregon is ahead of what the state is doing as a whole. It's ahead of what many communities are doing. So when I go out and I talk to people on the other part of the state, they want to know, how are you getting great responses from Pendleton? How are you getting great responses from Milton Freewater? How are you getting great responses from Umatilla? And what I tell them is because we have people that are engaged. We have people that are interested in what we're trying to do. So we have schools with very high diverse populations. And then we have some with somewhat high in Pendleton population, but the response is the same. And so people in the state are recognizing what we're doing. And people in the state are excited about what we're doing. I'm excited because we're being a model for the state. But not only for the state, we're being a model for other communities, smaller communities like the ones in which we live. And we're showing other communities how do we engage and have conversations about being culturally responsive. How do we engage in conversations about who we are and how we connect with one another. So on this level you see it, but on a state level and even on the national level, I see how people are responding. I should tell you this, about a month ago I was in Atlanta and I was presenting on some of the work that we're doing. Actually, when Christina Sleater was here, I was in Atlanta presenting on the work we're doing here. And even people on the national level know the kind of work we're doing and are excited about the kind of work we're doing. So tonight we have Dr. Milner, one of my good friends. We've known each other for about 6 years or so now. And a lot of the things that he talks about and the work that he talks about is what we're doing. And I think you're going to have a real treat tonight to hear someone that's echoing a lot of what we're doing and hopefully bring another level to what we're doing and connecting to what we're doing. Okay? So before I ask him to come up, what I want you all to do Let's give yourself a round of applause for the work you're doing. Even the students. Now we have Tanya Lewis, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Good evening. And good evening. We are live streaming this. We have a lot of people online watching as well. So that's why we're doing the microphones. Good evening, faculty, staff, students, and community members, as well as those online. As Dr. Easton stated, my name is Tanya Lubis, and I am a faculty member in the College of Education here at Eastern Oregon University. But tonight my role is the director of the new Center for Culturally Responsive Practices, and this is our third event this year as part of grant funding that we received from the Oregon Educational Investment Board and the Oregon Department of Education. This evening it's my pleasure to tell you about our guest, Dr. Rich Milner. Dr. Milner is a Helen, Faison, Endowed Chair of the Urban Education, Professor of Education, Sociology, Social Work, and Africana Studies, as well as the Director of the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh. He has a lot of hats. Previously, Professor Milner was an Associate Professor of Education in the Departments of Teaching and Learning and Leadership, Policy and Organization, as well as a Founding Director of the Graduate Program in Learning, Diversity, and Urban Studies at Peabody College of Vanderbilt University. Notably, at Vanderbilt in 2008, he became the very first Black person to earn promotion and tenure in the entire College of Education's 225-year history. He's served in leadership roles in many national organizations, and his work is widely recognized both nationally and internationally. His research, teaching, and policy interests concern urban education, teacher education, African American literature, and the sociology of education. Dr. Milner's work has appeared in numerous journals, and he has published 5 books. Most recently, his book that was just released last week, Racing to Class, Confronting Poverty and Race in Schools and Classrooms, by Harvard Education Press. His work has appeared in the New York Times, National Education Association Today, and Education Week. His work is also recognized in nearly every teacher education program across the nation and has been cited over 2,500 times. He's received several awards and has been recognized for his excellent contributions in the field of education, but most importantly, Dr. Milner has been married for 10 years and is the proud father of identical twin 4-year-old daughters. At this time, it's my honor to introduce you all to my friend, Dr. Milner, and invite him to share his research and practice with you tonight.
All right. Are you able to hear me? Okay, all right, good stuff. How y'all doing? All right, great. I want to take this opportunity to recognize and thank Donald Easton Brooks, one of the most important educators of our times. I also want to recognize and thank Tanya Lewis for, I got it right, the last name, I got it right, for the invitation here. Indeed, I am honored to be here, and to the acting dean and others who have a say in who was invited here. I'm very, very grateful. I grew up in a town that is very similar to LeGrand, and so in a lot of ways I feel connected to this space. Although I study urban education, I really have a lot of affinity towards and a lot of connections to rural environments. In fact, my hometown had about 16,000 folks when I was growing up, and I think we're now up to about 23,000 folks. So, and the marker was that we have 2 McDonald's, right? So it is indeed an honor to be here, and I feel connected in so many ways to the work you all are doing. I'm very, very appreciative, very appreciative to you, and thank you for being here today. So I want to talk so that we're able to maximize our time today about issues that can sometimes divide us and issues that sometimes will bring us together, but there are issues nonetheless that are central and germane to meeting the needs of all students across our country and also the world. The sort of framing question is really this one, and it's actually It emerges from a very important book by Jackie Irvine, that's called Seeing with the Cultural Eye. And the framing question is this: how do we help students dream who have only known nightmares? How do we help students dream who've only known nightmares? The first issue I want to talk about really is about our obsession with test scores. That's right, I said it. Our obsession with test scores. You know, in a lot of ways, it's unfair for us to blame teachers for these various layers and levels of accountability and so forth. We have such a strong emphasis on test scores that we sometimes forget that we're dealing with human beings, with real folks, right? And so students are more than test scores. They're more than numbers taken from the accumulation of some tests. And we have to take ownership of the discourse related to the situations that students are grappling with and the realities of what's happening in schools. We need to step back and really rethink, reform, if you will, the ways in which we talk about what's happening and the realities of what's going on in schools. We've got to shift our focus, I want to suggest, away from thinking only about outputs and really think strategically about inputs. Linda Darling-Hammond, who is a Stanford University professor and who was also an advisor to President Obama, said the following regarding outputs and inputs. You know, we were making progress in the 1970s and the early 1980s, and then things really halted in a lot of ways. And Darling-Hammond says that the Reagan era introduced a new form of reform focused on outcomes rather than inputs. That is, high-stakes testing without investing that drove most policy initiatives. The situation in many urban and rural schools deteriorated over the decades. Drops in real per pupil expenditures accompanied tax cuts and growing enrollments. Meanwhile, student needs grew with immigration, concentrated poverty and homelessness, and increased numbers of students requiring second language instruction and special education services. Although some federal support to high-need schools and districts was restored during the 1980s, it was not enough to fully recoup the earlier losses. And after 2000, inequality grew once again. So the big point here related to this issue is that I want to argue that we need to shift how we think. We need to shift how we talk about and conceptualize the realities of what's happening in our schools. We, teachers, those of us involved in education, teacher educators, community members, and so forth, we need to be on the front lines of disrupting and confronting discourses that would suggest that there's something inherently wrong with our students. And so what some of us are starting to argue is that we are indeed focusing on too much testing and not enough teaching. We're focusing on too much testing and not enough teaching. Now, if I were in the South, folk would be like, amen, amen, right? But I understand, and I'm out west, and you don't say, you don't do the amens here. But I know I'm telling the truth, right? We're focusing on too much testing and not enough teaching. And what Jackie Irvine and some of us are starting to argue is that we really don't have an achievement gap. What we have is a teacher quality gap and a teacher training gap and an effective leadership gap. We don't have an achievement gap. What we really have is a challenging curriculum gap and a school funding gap and a digital divide gap and a school counseling gap. You can say amen if you want to, right? And so we don't have an achievement gap. What we have is a wealth and income gap, and we have an employment opportunity gap, but we don't have an achievement gap. What we have is we have an affordable housing gap, and we have a healthcare gap, and we have a nutrition gap, and we have an instruction gap, and we have a school integration gap, and we don't have an achievement gap. What we have is a quality child care gap, and what we have a school and pop culture gap, and what I argue as an opportunity gap. Amen? Amen, right. So indeed, we've got to shift. Issue one is really about our obsession with testing, and I'm arguing that we've got to shift the way we think, the way we conceptualize, and moreover, because as Frele would tell us that our talk is action, we've got to shift the ways in which we talk about what's happening. What I do in this book, Start Where You Are But Don't Stay There, is I focus explicitly on how opportunity is at the core of our experiences and so forth in schools. And so I want to suggest that our talk matters, and we need to shift. We need to think about opportunity gaps versus achievement gaps. We need to focus on the assets that students bring, and we've got to focus and shift and move away from equality to issues of equity. Now, there will be a quiz at the end of my time with you today. So issue 1 is really about what? Our obsession with what? All right, good. So issue 2 is really about socioeconomic status and poverty. Socioeconomic status and poverty. But one of the things that I really want you to leave with today is this idea that poverty matters and socioeconomic status is important. But we've also, if we're going to talk seriously about poverty and socioeconomic status, we've got to talk explicitly as well about issues of race. If you take a look at these data, they give you a representation of the relationship between education and earnings here. So if you look here at the bottom, they show you educational level and the earnings, right, from 2000 and 2010. And this is annual earnings, so you just get a sense of that, right? Quickly, if I get a smile, I'll move on. Okay, all right, good. All right, so these data actually show the relationship over a career span as well. So if you look, and then from 2013, these data show you the poverty level, the poverty line. I don't know when the last time you've had a chance to look at these federal guidelines, but if you look here, I always use a family of 4 as my proxy. So in 48 states here, if one earns $23,551, imagine the family is considered above the poverty line, right? And so what does that mean in terms of resources and also the supports that the federal government will provide, right, and so forth? So according to the National Center for Children in Poverty, in 2013, 44%, don't miss this, 44% of all children and their families lived in low-income households, and 22%, that is 1 in 5, of children and their families live in poverty, live below the poverty line. While these percentages are distressing, equally as disturbing is the fact that poverty rates are highest for Black, Latino, and American Indian children. 39% of Black children live in poverty. 32% of Latino children live in poverty, and 36% of American Indian children live in poverty. In comparison, 13% of white children live in families below the poverty line. Now, we should absolutely, don't misinterpret what my point here is. We should absolutely, without a doubt, be concerned about all children. We should absolutely, without a doubt, be concerned about all students who live below the poverty line and family members. But we cannot negate and we cannot shy away from the reality that proportionally there are more students of color living below the poverty line than are white students, right? And so if we are mindful of that, then it makes it very difficult for us to develop interventions and programs and policies that might better meet the needs of students. So one big framing question really is this one. And the question is, how do people, how are they rewarded, and how do people come to places of their success and so forth? And I want to talk here very briefly about this idea of meritocracy. I want to talk about this idea of meritocracy. And meritocracy is the idea that folks are rewarded based mostly or solely on their ability, their performance, their talents, their hard work. When I was growing up, my dad told me, he said, Rich, you can do and you can be anything you want to be, right? You just got to work hard, put forth effort, and you can do it, buddy, right? So he bought into this notion of meritocracy. Most of us probably follow this way of this logic of thinking and so forth. So mindset 1, all groups of people were born with the same opportunities. And if students or people just work hard and put forth effort and follow the law, then like a formula, they'll be successful, right? And then we have a nerve to point to isolated incidences, right? And isolated cases, and we say, well, Oprah Winfrey did it, doggone it. Folks in the South would say, she did it, well, we can do it too, right? So, and we point to folks like Bill Gates and others who may have struggled and so forth as comparisons and as rationales, if you will, in terms of why some people are not succeeding and so forth. Mindset two, if students do not succeed, it is because they're not working hard enough, not because of other factors that may be outside of their control, Voices of teachers. One teacher said, I get so tired of people. She was actually talking about me, making something out of nothing. My grandparents immigrated to this country with nothing, and they made something of their lives because they worked hard. And so this is an ethos. This is what I constantly hear from teachers with whom I work and so forth. They rationalize that, I've had a tough situation. People will come in my classes. Teachers will sometimes come and say, when I was growing up, I grew up in a single family home and my I succeeded and so forth. And my response to them is very simple. And that is, good for you. Right? The reality is most people are doing the best they can in their particular situations. And so for some folks, it takes everything in them to get out of the bed in the morning. Folks who are dealing with abuse and they're dealing with various forms of addiction and so forth, they are barely holding on, right? And so if we rationalize that in our own life experiences, we've been able to work through and we rationalize that we've been able to succeed in the midst of difficult situations, it makes it difficult for us to understand that not all people respond to material conditions in the same way, right? All right, so I'm also mindful, as curriculum theorist Beverly Gordon states, she says, and don't miss this, she says, it's difficult to critique the world and work to change it when the world works for you. Hello. You get it? That's kind of deep, right? It's hard to critique a thing when a system is working for you to work to change it, right? The same thing is true on a localized level. When my wife is doing all the dishes and making sure our household is running smoothly, I don't have a problem with it. I don't, but it's when she forces me to step back and think about whether it's fair and equitable, that's when I have to sort of make the shift, right? Another two students said, I'm going to be the kind of teacher who follows your advice. These are teachers I've worked with over the years, who follows your advice and have high expectations. If a student is not turning in his homework on time, I'm not going to give any slack. It's going to be a 0 in my grade book. No conception about why the teacher is not turning in his homework on time, right? So what does money bring? Trust funds established and passed down from one generation to the next, right? Trust funds just passed down from one generation to the next. I had a colleague when I was at another institution that shall remain nameless, and he asked me, he said, Rich, will you take me to CarMax? We're going to get a new car for our family, a new minivan. And I said, sure, So we get in the car, and as we're driving, at the time, my wife was a State Farm agent. And I'm sure you know this, but State Farm does more than home loans, more than car insurance, right? They also do car loans and so forth. Did y'all know that about State Farm? Did y'all know that, right? You should give State Farm a try. But anyway, so we're driving along, and I say to my colleague, I say, hey man, what kind of interest rate are you getting on this thing, on this car that you're getting ready to pick up? And I can sense him frowning up. As you're driving, you can feel something. I'm like, why is this guy frowning up at me, right? I'm just asking about the interest rate. And he said, Rich, don't you know I would never take a loan out on a car? Don't you know, Rich, that as soon as you drive a car off the car lot, the car depreciates? I was like, yep, I know that. Yep, I understand that. He said, we pay cash for our vehicles. We pay cash for our cars. Now, here's someone who had been at the university a few years longer than I, right? We both had PhDs. And this person was able to go and write a $20-something thousand check to pay for a car, right? Now, we better be earning about the same amount of money, right? Because We had been there about the same number of years, and our salary should have been on par, right? You know, you would think, right? But what I came to understand in the midst of our conversation is that he had a trust fund. And he was able to go in and write a check to pay for his, to pay for the car, right? Now, I'm not mad at it. But let's just be honest about the way things work. Some of us act like we are where we are because we've been so great. You know, we act like that we have achieved what we've achieved and no one has given us a hand up. Nobody has done anything for us along the way. But if we're honest, everybody in this room, like we all benefit from folks who have opened doors for us. Opportunity. Opportunity. We are benefactors. We benefit from opportunity, right? For those, how many of you are sports fans in here? Right? Okay, so it's like baseball folks. Where are the baseball folks? All right, so it's like, Donna waves his hand like that. It's like, don't miss, so it's like being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple. You get it, right? So the reality is we've got to be mindful that the folks with whom you're working, they're probably doing the best they can. You've got to understand why things are as they are. Other things, I got to move a lot faster. All right, so property, as in homes and so forth. What else does money bring? Finance college education without having to solicit student loans. My wife didn't have any student loan debt when we got married, and she still married me. And I had lots and lots of student loan debt, right? Private and independent school tuition, right? Tutoring in academic subjects and so forth. What does this money bring? Exposure to different cultures and languages. Financial support and assistance with graduate studies. When I moved from South Carolina to that's right, I said it, to the Ohio State University, my mom was still continuing. Are you out there, Mom? Are you listening? My mom was sending me, she continued to send me like these care packages with crackers in it and nuts and these kinds of, and eventually I got bold. I said, Mama, stop sending me these care packages. I need money. Send money, right? But she continued to send those care packages with the nuts. Right? All right. Kaplan and tutorial programs preparing for. I didn't know what a Kaplan course was until I was in my second year of graduate studies at the Ohio State University. I had no idea that folks could take a tutorial course, right, to enhance their GRE scores, vacations and getaways, and so forth, right? Just what money brings, So what research? Research suggests that teachers need to recognize that factors far beyond ability and talent and hard work and effort gives folks their position in society. From a sociological perspective, if the meritocracy argument were accurate, all positions would be awarded based on merit. If so, ability should predict who goes to college. Instead, family income is the best predictor. The more a family earns, the more likely their children are to go to college. While some people do get ahead through ability and hard work, others simply inherit wealth and the opportunities that go with it. In short, factors far beyond merit give people their positions in society. So what was issue 1? You got to say more than testing. What about testing? Obsession with testing. Issue 2 was about what? Socioeconomic status and poverty. Issue 3 is about counseling and psychological services in schools. Counseling and psychological services in schools. I want to share with you an experience I had. And I was working in a school, and I was doing some research in a school. And I want you to follow me, because if you don't follow me, I'm going to keep giving you nuanced details that really don't matter. So I just kind of need you to, if you understand, like, give me like some kind of nonverbals. All right, okay. So I was conducting research in a middle school. So far, conducting research in the middle school, and there's the neighborhood store, a store a few hundred feet away from this middle school was a mom and pop convenience store. This store was robbed by high school students, not middle school students, right? High school students, and this was the feeder school to the middle school. With me so far? All right. So 3 high school students. This actually made national news. 3 high school students that go in, they shoot and kill the store clerk. right? So this was a mom and pop shop. So this couple, they opened the store in the morning, they closed it at night. They had all their meals there. It was their life, right? So this happened like on a Thursday. The following week, I was scheduled to be back in the school. And so when I arrived on the bus yard, arrived on the campus, guess what the students were still talking about? They were still talking about the robbery, right? They were posing questions like, I wonder where they got the gun. I wonder, what were they thinking? Like this is in the corridors. The students were talking about the robbery. But in the classroom, right, there was nothing, no mention about it. First period, nothing. Second period, nothing. Third period, nothing. In the cafeteria, again, as I eavesdrop, as good researchers do, right, the students were still talking about the robbery. They were talking about the robbery. And so I conducted professional development with the teachers. And I just posed a question. I said, hey, guys, I'm just wondering why there was no mention, no discussion, no alignment of the robbery with your lessons in the classroom. And when I tell you the people in that room ganged up on me, like one after the other, they were so offended, and they gave me example and reason after reason why it was inappropriate for them to engage the robbery. And, to their credit, they actually had some good, they had some sound examples or some sound reasons why it was inappropriate. What do you think some of the reasons are that I heard in terms of why the robbery was not taken up? What do you think I heard? Give me some ideas, examples. I didn't. Were you did? Absolutely, yes. Why would we glorify, right? If we bring it up, then the students, heard that. What else do you think I heard? Yes. Students might be afraid. Yep, actually heard that. These are middle schoolers. We don't want to make, right, absolutely heard that. What else? Yes.
Maybe since it's like outside of the community, try to keep it outside, not within the school.
Right, this is something that happened outside of school. We don't need to bring those negative circumstances and so forth inside of school. Heard that. What else? I want to hear the one thing and then I'll move on. All right. Okay. Sorry. Right. It could elicit more sort of traumatic memories or insights, right? Okay. Yes.
So the feeder school, what if some of the kids in the middle school, they're
Sibling. Right, absolutely. In fact, there was a cousin in the middle school to one of the students. Heard that, right? This is one more. We'll take one more. Yeah. Yeah, kind of heard that one, but not as much. But I also heard that, I don't want to upset family members, right? There are legal ramifications, and right. So heard that, and we'll take one more. I bet you have it. What is it? You're in the neighborhood, right? That is not a part of the real curriculum, right? And more, but when a teacher said, and a robbery won't show up on the test. There was a collective sigh of agreement. Yeah. So the teachers were like, we're under, and I get it. I understand. Teachers are under an enormous amount of pressure so the students can perform and be successful, right? And then there was a guy who, if I set my computer up on this side of the library, he sat on that side of the library with his arms folded, right? If I set my computer up on this side of the library, he sat on that side of the library with his arms folded. He never said one word to me the entire time I was in the school doing work. In fact, one day, he wouldn't even talk to me. So one day I was like, he's going to talk to me today. So I stood like at the entrance of the door. As people were walking out talking, I was like, I want to make sure when he walks out, because, people like me. I'm rich. Like, people like me, right? So as he was walking out, when he realized what I was doing, he turned around, went back to his seat, and started working on his laptop. He just refused to talk to me. And on this day, he raised his hand, and he said, and I was like, come with it, because I'm not scared. What do you have to say to me, right? Come with it. And he said, I teach math and science. What in the world does a robbery have to do with my teaching math and science? Give me a break, right? And so I said to him, well, let's think about it for a moment. I said, what if crime had been a concern in the community? I said, on a very basic level, what if you counted the number of liquor stores? What if you counted the the number of street lights in the community and the distance between the street lights. There's some math in that, very basic, right? I said, what if you counted the number of liquor stores in the community, right? And you looked at the relationship between access to alcohol and crime. There's some math in that, right? Is there some math in that? Yeah. I said, what if you did the same thing with guns, right? Or gun shops. If you had the students look at the relationship between gun shop accessibility and crime. There's some math in that. And I said, but beyond that, right? What perhaps matters more than whether or not you're able to make some smooth connection to the stated curriculum, right? It's the fact that the students are mourning, right? And the assumption was that the students were mourning about the students who committed the crime, because they, as you said, these were students who lived in the community and they knew, right? They were mourning because of the store clerks. They had developed a relationship with the store clerks. And you know how I know? I asked them. And so when I said that, the teachers in the room were baffled. Well, they didn't really know those folks. They didn't really know the store clerk, the owners of that store, right? But this happens time and time again, right? And for the students who need support, who need, your grown self, when you're grappling with loss and traumatic experiences, you need someone to talk to. But in our educational system, we refuse to do it. In our educational system, this is not, it's not rocket science. In fact, we know what to do to meet the needs of all of our students. It's very well documented. Like we know what to do. This is not like when people talk about education. It's such a it's a difficult quandary. We have no idea. We know what to do. We just refuse to do it. We refuse to do it. So when was Colorblind? What year was Colorblind? 1999. Like 99, I think. Somebody see. Y'all young folks should be in there Googling and looking over there. But Jeff Duncan Andrade makes it clear that students in Columbine are still receiving counseling and psychological services. And you know what? They should be. They should be, right? It's okay for Columbine, but in our communities, right? In communities where students live below the poverty line, in communities where there's a large percentage of black and brown children, we say they'll just have to figure it out. We don't have the money to do that. We don't have the resources to do that, right? But we can build more prisons. We can build more prisons, right? But we don't have the money to provide counseling and psychological services for students who are dealing with and who are grappling with trauma, with traumatic experiences. Shame on us, right? Shame on us, right? And so when we think about ways of supporting students, if you look at these data, about 1 in 5 schools across the country lacks a guidance counselor in the school. And if you look at these data, these show you based on urban or rural availability of counselors and social workers. You see it? Okay, city and suburban. I'm sorry, city and suburban. So the city is the yellow. The availability of psychologists, social workers, counselors, and so forth. Right? Counselors is a little bit higher, but in all of the other areas, the city schools are under-resourced in those areas. Shame on us. Shame on us. All right? So we're not going to end on a negative note. I want y'all to leave depressed. But the reality is these are issues that matter. What was issue 1? Our obsession with testing, right? Issue 2 was about what? socioeconomic status and poverty. Issue 3 was about counseling and psychological services. And so issue 4, ooh, I know it's going to get quiet now, is about race. Issue 4 is about race. Issue 4 is about race. And what is it about this thing called race that makes it so difficult for us to engage? What is it about race that makes folks so uncomfortable to engage in mixed company? What is it? Guilt, okay, all right. Inability to recognize our own privilege, right? Okay. Embarrassed, right. So if I say something and it might be taken, right, and I'm coming from a sincere place, it could be taken out of context, absolutely. What else? Political correctness. Political correctness, absolutely. Yes. What else? Anybody else? What else is it about this race thing? Jump in. Fear of the unknown, absolutely. I can't control it once it comes out, right? All right, yeah. What I know for sure, and I don't speak in definitive terms often, right? I choose my words very carefully. But telling you what I know for sure is if we don't get race right, we're in trouble, right? We're going to reap the consequences of our adults' inability and unwillingness to deal with race. Race is what's constant. Look at the data. It's not what Rich Milner is saying, right? If you look at the data, what is constant is our issues of race. And so we've got to figure race out. When I go into schools, it's always really telling. Sometimes what I find is, when I walk onto a campus, teachers will say, or the principal will meet me if I'm doing a professional development, and they'll say something to me like, DeMarcus, they'll say, it's really not about race, right? We're really struggling. We feel more comfortable talking about poverty, right? Feel more comfortable talking about poverty, but race is salient and it's pervasive, and until we get it right, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. So some of us adopt these colorblind ideologies, and we sometimes claim that, we were raised in the South. We say, I don't see race, I just see people, right? And I don't know why we've got to deal with this race thing, right? Mindset 1, if I acknowledge the racial, ethnic background of my students or myself, then I may be considered racist, right? Mindset 2, if I admit that people experience and see the world differently, I may be seen as politically incorrect. Who said that? Yep. And we didn't even talk beforehand, did we? Right? I said you right here. All right. What about this one? But we know that race is salient when we look at standardized test scores, right? We know that race is salient when we look at who's suspended and expelled from school. We know that race is salient, but we won't do it. What else? I should treat all my students the same regardless of who they are, what their home situations are, or what their experiences related to race happens to be. On a classroom level, it is critical that we move away from these colorblind ideologies and so forth. And what I always share is that there's a lot of, I have a lot of identity markers. I'm someone's dad, I'm someone's husband, I'm someone's son, but I am a black man. And when I walk into the supermarket, and when I'm pulled over by the police, I don't have Rich Milner, PhD, Helen, Faison professor written on my forehead, right? I'm a black man. And my experiences are shaped by my being black. I could give you example after example after example, which provides evidence space that race is salient and is pervasive and has to be addressed in our work. If we adopt colorblind ideologies and so forth, it makes it very difficult to recognize that there's an overrepresentation of students of color in special education, right? If you're just doing the work, I'm not thinking, I have myopic tunnel vision, right? We don't recognize that there's an underrepresentation of students of color in gifted education, right? We could talk about DSEG, right? We could talk about what happened after Brown versus Board of Education. There were pre-DSEG African American students, for instance, were experiencing and benefiting from gifted courses and so forth. But after desegregation, post-deseg, what happened was all of a sudden the only students who were intellectually capable were little white children, right? And so that systemic shift really changed the ways in which students were gained or experienced access to gifted education. There is an over-referral of African American students to the office. There's an overwhelming number of African Americans and Latino students expelled or suspended. And some of us believe that surely it's the students themselves that deserve these situations. And in some situations, students do need to be corrected, but these are systemic challenges. Black students, for instance, are 3 times more likely to receive special education services for mental retardation and 2.3 times more likely for emotional disturbances than all other ethnic groups combined. Further, they are more likely to be educated away from their peers than students from any other ethnic racial group. Overwhelmingly, Black students and brown students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students. Although African American students represent about 18% of preschool enrollment, don't miss this. In 2011 and 2012 school year, they made up 42% of the preschool students who were suspended once, and 48% of those suspended more than once. And my question for preschool is, what are they doing? Throwing Cheerios across the room? What is it that preschoolers are doing such that the educational system is not prepared to keep them inside of the classroom? Shame on us. Shame on us. Black and Latino students represent 26% of the students enrolled in gifted and talented education programs, but 40% of the enrollment in schools offering such programs, right? And so when you look at these data and you approach the work not with a race from a race conscious perspective, you don't realize or recognize that there's something going on. There's something going on, and it ain't. That's right, Mom. I said ain't. I'm sorry. It isn't always the students themselves. The educational system is failing our students, but we refuse. We're scared. We refuse to engage race. We got to engage. If we don't get race right, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And I have 2 little black daughters. I have 2 black children who are growing up in a society, right, that I worry about every day, right? And it doesn't matter. We're in this together, y'all. We're in this together. So you can drive off to the suburbs. You can move wherever you want to move, right? But there's no place to run and no place to hide, right? Because the reality is, when their basic needs are not met, when people are struggling, right, they react in they react in ways that might interfere with your lived reality, right? So we're in this together. We're in this together. My children are your children, right? And yours are mine. And so we've got to figure out in courageous ways how to make a difference, how to make a difference. All right, so issue 1 was about what? Obsession with test scores. Issue 2 was about what? Socioeconomic. This is a good group, all right? Socioeconomic standards and poverty. Issue 3 was about what? Counseling and psychological services. Issue 4 was about race. They just said race. That's right. Okay. And last but not least is really about instructional practices, right? And so taking all of these areas of these issues together, we also know that together we sometimes struggle to come together in terms of how we should be providing instructional practices. I want to suggest that developing relationships and building on student interest and linking outside of school realities with inside of school curriculum and instructional practices are key. When you think about the curriculum, they're key when we think about instructional practices, and they're also key when we think about relationships that we will develop and so forth. These data show you and provide a snapshot of how students are spending their lives or spending their time outside of the classroom. Just take a look at this. Even though Facebook's minimum age requirement is 13, 5 million. Is that surprising to y'all? Look at these data. But then in the classroom, we say, don't bring your cell phone in, turn off your laptop. If you have one, because everybody doesn't have one, we say, don't bring an iPad into the space. Right? We've got to radically reform how we do education. What do you notice about pop culture? What I notice is that students will listen to music for hours or play video games for hours and hours and hours and hours, right? But rush to finish their homework or not do their homework at all. Any ameners in this room? Any gamers in the room? Any gamers? Anybody play games? Video games? Oh, yes, yes. All right. And we know that students, Jim G., who was, I think he's at the University of Arizona now, but he talks about the link between so learning theory, how we can use students' exposure and interactions with gaming as a tool for learning and so forth. So I want us to play a quick game here. And when we're going to split the room. I said from the very beginning, and there's some research that talks about self-fulfilling prophecy, right? But I said from the very beginning, my money was on Team B, right? And even when Team A may have gotten some points, right, I didn't really hear you. Right? I decided that I was going to hear Team B. And subconsciously, what we know from the research is that teachers play into this, right? And there is a self-fulfilling prophecy that can actually hinder certain groups of students. And when you think about you, the people on Team A, how did you feel always being behind? It kind of said, and then I constantly reminded you of it as well, right? I constantly told you that you were substandard and that you need to catch up, right? All right, so. Right. So at one point you were kind of absolutely. So at one point people were like, doesn't matter, because he's gonna make sure Team B gets it. That's right. That's right. All right. So mindset 1. I must teach students based on how I teach my own biological children, not based on their culture and experiences in the world, which may or may not be consistent with my own. Mindset 2. I don't like that loud rap music, and I refuse to even think about ways to make connections in my classroom. Mindset 3. I wish life was the way it was when I was in school. These kids spend too much time on this popular culture. It is ruining them, right? Okay? But thinking about pop culture and Common Core standards and so forth, if you look at what these Common Core standards big themes are, there are logical ways for us to make links between areas and issues, and not issues, but areas and interests of students outside of school and to make logical links inside of schools. All right, so I want to transition here to things that we can do and things that we should be doing to better meet the needs of all students. And what I want to talk about now, and these are practices, these are insights, these are interventions that I've found across districts, across schools, across classrooms, across the country that are quote-unquote successful. When I moved to Pittsburgh, I often asked about the many assets in the space, right? And the community members and people, educators and so forth, they often struggled to identify positive attributes and aspects of our community, right? And it was through delving into these areas that they started to realize that we have outstanding educational facilities, higher education facilities. University of Pittsburgh is there, Carlo is there, Carnegie Milner is right there in the city. We have some of the best health care in the country. We have really strong community organizations, committed and dedicated educators. We have committed and dedicated students and families, and we have environments of faith and care. If I were to ask you, what are the strengths, what are the assets in your community? I wonder if you could tell me, and you could tell me in a way that talked about the synergy between and among them. Each of these entities works well, and it makes a contribution individually. They make each one of them makes a contribution individually, but it's the collective push, the collective contribution that I think we need to really work towards. What else should we be doing? Pedro Noguera says we need to increase the number of adults in every classroom. Remember I said we know what to do, we just refuse to do it? Now we're going to talk about the things that we know with solid evidence would make a huge difference, right? Increase the number of adults in every classroom. Pedro talks about a situation in New York City where the students are homeless. They literally have to leave school early to get in lines to get a bed for the evening, right? And we think we're dealing with difficult situations, right? Pedro says that the reality is these students are succeeding, and they succeed because when they walk into the classroom, there are 4 or 5 adults in every one of those classrooms, right? There's a lead teacher, there's an assistant, there's a social worker, there might be a counselor, there's a community member. And because the students come to the classroom with various and varying needs, the adults in those classrooms are able to respond to and tie in and tap into whatever the need space happens to be. We know what to do. We just refuse to do it. Again, when I talk about, or we talk about this recommendation, people frown at me because they say, yeah, who has the money to do all that? Again, it's about what we care about. We put our emphases, right, based on what we care about. So rather than invest in educational interventions and educational interventions, we choose to do other things with our money, right? What else? Incorporate language and literacy development across the curriculum. In other words, every teacher in every school across the country needs to be trained as an ELA teacher. Because when you think about those skills are transferable to other areas, right? You get it? So, what? Amen. Say amen, right? And so those skills are transferable, right? So the social studies teacher can talk about main idea. The social studies teacher can point out the topic sentence, and they can talk about how you develop a thesis statement, and all those kinds of areas. And building those literacy skills are important. What else? Provide continual study skills, courses, and opportunities. Many students, if you walk into classrooms, students are writing everything down that the teacher is saying. When's the last time, I don't know, for me, like, no one ever taught me how to read a text, right? How do you read an information text? Common Core standards. They're saying we need to know how to read, how to, if you're not taught how to read an information text, you read an information text quite differently than you read a novel. But students often are not taught that skill to be able to do. Organizational skills. We've got to do a much better job of preparing substitute teachers. In many school districts across the country, substitute teachers basically go in and do a background check, and they basically serve as babysitters. Sometimes you have substitute teachers who are in classrooms for weeks, months at a time, with no content knowledge at all. And guess which students, you guessed it, proportionately are taught by substitute teachers who are underprepared, right? What else? We've got to radically reform in-school suspension. They basically are jail-like cells, if you will, in many schools, right? So students go in, they might sit down and do a series of worksheets and so forth, but very little learning is taking place in those spaces, and we know it. We've got to provide mentoring programs and so forth. I'm a member, when I was I lived in Tennessee, I was a member of the 100 Black Men of Middle Tennessee, and all we did all day long was mentor, right? So if you know that some of your students are struggling and they might need a mentor, then it is our responsibility to provide those mentors for students. Family support mechanisms such as healthcare, job placement, English language learning development. All of those things can be attended to in the school. If you think about if the school takes the responsibility to say, you know what, I know that if my students haven't been to the dentist, or if I know that my students need a checkup, a health exam, right? This provides opportunities to respond to those realities. I know that there's a high level of unemployment among the families in my school, right? Taking ownership and saying, you know what, we're going to work as a unit to be able to respond here. Responding to neighborhood conditions as well. Some students have made it through hell and high water. Can I say hell? Hell and high water to get to you, right? They have. They've walked through, gang violence. They walked over crack pipes to get to you. And the first thing we say is, sit down and shut up. Have a seat. Have a seat. Right? They come in and they don't think about it. Right? Respond. We've got to respond to. Something just went all over me when I said that, right? And I know for sure that I am sending you the best. Parents are sending you the best they can send you in the morning. When my daughters leave, even when my wife is traveling and I got to do their hair, right? I'm doing the best I can. I'm sending you the best I can send you, right? On any given day, people are sending you the best they, and nothing matters to me more than Anna and Elise. Nothing, right? What else? Rethink and reform the inflexible and the narrowing of the curriculum, that is the shrinking curriculum. We know that in certain populations that students are not exposed to the brevity of curricular opportunities. And of course, because of that, their exposure to content areas are diminished. We need to reduce class size, and I know you academics in the room will say, well, the research would suggest that there's not a direct correlation between reduced class size and student test scores. So what? Right? For students who are quote-unquote school dependent, those reduced class sizes can be the difference maker, because it gives teachers the opportunity and students the opportunity to build connections, to talk about things that might be otherwise seen as taboo, right? As taboo. So I wanna conclude with a video here, and I want to conclude with a video here, and the video is very short. It's about 2 minutes. I know I'm over my time, but you should have given me more time, and because I got a lot to say. I want to keep going. I reduced my slides earlier, but that's okay. So you ready? Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and thanks for making me cry. You should have showed me that first. Jeez. We have passed out some surveys, so we'd really like to have your feedback. We do plan to continue this work next year with another series of presenters, and hope you'll join us then. Do keep in mind that these are archived, so you can review them at any time at our website, eou.edu/CCRP. At this time, we would like to invite you to the foyer for cookies and coffee and to continue the conversation outside. Our Oregon Teacher Pathway students, mentors, and teachers are invited to go get a snack and then come back and have a special session with Dr. Milner. And we do have a door prize winner as well, Giselle Flores. You get an EOU hat and a copy of Start Where You Are, but Don't Stay There. And I'm sure Dr. Milner would love to sign that for you. Thank you all for coming. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again.